Hey guys, this is Z-House from Gun Gamers with another educational rant. A little bit more industry talk because, well, there's some interesting stuff to talk about. We're gonna have some fun today. We're talking about patents, trademarks, trade dress, and copyright infringement. So everyone and their mother probably already knows the news of why this video is coming out now, but in case you've missed it, A&K is releasing a replica of the Krytac Vector, and this is big news because obviously Krytac has their own Krytac Vector coming out that is officially licensed from Krytac Group because Krytac is a subsidiary of Krytac Group, and A&K looks to be beating them to the punch. And everyone's talking about what this means in terms of whether or not we'll ever see it in the States. Is A&K going to get sued? All kinds of really interesting stuff coming out. And I figured I would talk to you a little bit about kind of what I know about how some of this works with the industry and some of the legal stuff that applies. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I will say that right now. I am not a lawyer. All I can speak from is some of the stuff that I've heard and seen in, being kind of in the industry a little bit. I have a lot of friends who are retailers, and I have some friends who are actually working on the back end of the industry at manufacturers and OEMs and distributors, and who are working with all kinds of companies. And I, at my day job, sometimes deal with distributors and manufacturers and the relationships that they can have with dealers. So that's where things are going to get interesting. So the big question, is A&K going to get sued? No. A&K is based in China, and in China, the trademark and the trade dress laws that protect Krytac Group's trademark and their patents on the Krytac design do not apply because those are only valid where Krytac Group holds them, and those are not in China. So in China, A&K is not violating the law by making this thing and selling it to distributors in China. The people who would be violating the law or be subject to possible legal recourse would be distributors or retailers who bring it into areas where that trademark or trade dress or patent can be upheld. So let's explain some of the terms that I'm throwing out here. In the United States and in some other areas of the world, but I'm mostly talking about the United States because that's where I live and that's where I'm talking about, there are three main things that are going to apply to a situation like this that we're talking about: trademark, patents, and trade dress. All three of these are forms of intellectual property rights that individuals and companies can have and take out. So trademark will be branding and logos and names and stuff like that that are associated with a product or a company and are used to identify and differentiate that brand or that product from others on the market. Trademark is obviously a big deal, and if you don't defend your trademark or your copyright, then you can lose it. That's probably why Krytac Group is going to fight this to the death if anyone tries to bring the A&K Vector into any areas that they hold that trademark. Then there's trade dress that I just mentioned. Trade dress is an element of trademark, or at least related, and trade dress are aspects of a product's visual design or packaging that are used to identify that product and sell that product, and this is a combination of trademarks and possibly patents on a product's visual design that differentiate it and make it a distinct product. Trade dress is the reason you don't see Glocks widely distributed in the United States, because Glock aggressively defends their trade dress and their patents on their polymer frame pistol design. So if you are trying to sell something that is using Glock's trade dress to get sold, then Glock is going to come after you legally because you are using their trade dress without their permission. And that's the same situation that's going to apply to the A&K Vector. And then there's patents, which might not apply as much, but there are some patented elements of the Vector design externally, apparently, and definitely internally. I mean, the Vector, if you know about the real firearm, is very interesting internally. Shoot one if you've never had the chance. It's really cool. But the Vector has some patented elements to the external design that are going to really make this a big crapshoot. So between the trademark and the trade dress of the Krytac Vector design and the patents on some of the external features of the Krytac Vector, it's unlikely that A&K will ever get to bring the Krytac Vector that they're making over to the United States because it is legally not licensed by Chris Group. They have no permission to use Chris Group's intellectual property, and therefore any retailers selling it, any distributors bringing it in, and anyone violating those intellectual property rights is going to be subject to legal recourse. Now, that doesn't mean that A&K won't sell it. There are areas where Chris Group has no legal protection for their intellectual property. Those are going to be areas where they don't hold any patents or trademarks, or their patents and trademarks are just not valid. So in the United States, and I'm pretty sure in Switzerland, where Chris Group is based, those are probably where they hold those. But if we're talking about China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and a litany of other countries, there's no legal protection for the A&K Vector, or rather for Chris Group to go after the A&K Vector. It can exist, and there's not really much they can do about it. Now, whether you think that's right or wrong, I mean, everyone's going to have their personal opinions on the subject. This is what the airsoft industry does. They do what they can legally get away with to try to bring a new product to market that they think they can sell. But there are also tools in the toolbox of license holders and trademark and patent holders that they can use to defend their legal right to have exclusive rights to their trade dress, trademarks, and patents in the areas where those are valid. And not all of those are strictly legal or strictly to do with going to court, but all of those are going to affect how this plays out. So obviously, one big method, the one everyone was talking about, is lawsuit. If someone is infringing on your design, is infringing on your intellectual property, and you have legal right to it, not only can you go after someone for infringing your intellectual property, you kind of have to. Because if you don't, if you can have it proven in court where you have not aggressively defended your intellectual property, there is legal grounds for you to lose the rights to your intellectual property if you haven't adequately defended it. So if someone, say, is bringing in the A&K Vector and they are selling it within the United States, they're a distributor or a retailer, Chris Group can send a cease and desist letter and let them know, if you don't stop what you're doing right now, we can and will sue you, so stop what you're doing. And obviously if they don't stop, that's where it's going to go to court, or maybe they'll go to court immediately, who knows. But then that's the big legal one. The big legal one is obviously cease and desist, then go to court. But there's also other ways, and this is where I see some of the experience that I've had at my day job kind of kick in with how you can get creative with this. For example, let's say a retailer or a distributor is selling the A&K Vector, but they're also selling Krytac and Chris Group licensed products. Chris Group can not only send a cease and desist legally, or maybe if that's in an area where they have a Krytac distributorship, but Krytac or Chris Group doesn't hold the trademark, then they can say, hey, if you want to sell the A&K Vector and Krytac products, that's not going to fly. We can pull our authorized retailer or distribution status from you, and you will no longer be able to deal directly with Krytac or get Krytac products and carry those. So if you lose Krytac, then you do stand to lose a pretty big player in the airsoft industry potentially. So a lot of retailers and distributors are probably not going to chance it, because losing that distributorship from Krytac could be a blow to their sales, especially if their competitors are still going to have it. And this is where things get kind of unique with this situation, because as many of you probably know, Lilacs has partnered with Krytac to distribute Krytac in Japan. Normally, Japan is kind of a copyright no man's land. There's a reason that there's a lot of Tokyo Marui Glocks and M&Ps and all kinds of unauthorized replicas coming out of Tokyo Marui, because trademarks and patents in the United States may not apply in Japan. But that's where things get interesting for Krytac, because even though they probably don't hold legal right to the Chris Vector design and trademarks in Japan, they can lean on Lilacs and say, hey, if you have anyone selling that A&K Vector within Japan and selling Krytac products, then you need to lean on them and make sure that they know that they can lose their right to carry Krytac products if we see them selling that A&K Vector. That's a competing product that infringes on our copyright and our intellectual property. And then, of course, the biggest way that Krytac can deal a death blow to the odds of success for the A&K Vector is by making their upcoming Vector a better product at a competitive price point. Now, we're not sure exactly what the A&K Vector is going to retail for, but we do know that the Krytac Vector is coming. Now, will the Krytac Vector be more expensive than the A&K Vector? Most likely. Krytac products generally tend to be on the premium end of the price range, and that's going to limit their sales inherently. So will the A&K Vector hurt the sales of the Krytac? Possibly, but the fact of the matter is that people who want the most accurate replica of a Vector are gonna buy the Krytac because it's already been pointed out ways in which the A&K is not a completely accurate replica, and that's because they don't have the endorsement of the real manufacturer and they probably don't have access to a real example of the Vector. So when you have Krytac, who's a subsidiary of Chris Group, who can get all the Vectors they want to take a look at, then they're gonna have a much more accurate recreation of the real firearm. And if you're a nerd like me, then that probably matters a little bit. Then Krytac also has a very good reputation for performance, and they're going to lean on that and point out the way in which that even if you're looking at the A&K Vector and even if you're tempted by the lower price point, their product is just better. And that's the biggest way that they can really compete with the clone market, is just by making a better product. Clones and copies are always going to exist. They've always existed for as long as any type of product has existed. People have always been making copies and clones, trying to make them cheaper and trying to beat the guy who invented it. But the best way to beat those guys is to be a step ahead and show that you can justify either the larger price tag or justify the purchase of your product over their product. So making a better product, even if it's more expensive, is the best thing Chris Group can do to compete with the A&K Vector. And frankly, I don't see the A&K Vector selling crazy well to diehard enthusiasts. I'm sure some people will buy it instead of the Krytac because it will be cheaper, but at the same time, I wonder if those were the type of people who ever would have bought the Krytac Vector in the first place. I mean, Krytac M4s seem to be selling very, very well regardless of anything else, even though they're pricey guns. But you're gonna always have the people who look at Krytac M4s and say, why would I buy a Krytac when I can buy a combat machine? And they'll buy the combat machine instead. Does that mean that the combat machine is hurting the sales of the Krytac? Not really, it's just that they weren't looking to spend the amount of money that the Krytac M4 cost, and maybe they wouldn't have spent that amount of money regardless of if cheaper options were available. In summation, this is kind of a long video. I hope it all makes sense. A&K can't get sued. Distributors or retailers who are carrying the product can, or at least carrying the product in areas where Chris Group owns the trademark and the trade dress of the Vector. Areas where that trademark and trade dress are not valid can still be leaned on as threatening to lose their distributorship of Krytac products, which is definitely a very powerful tool. And the best thing that Krytac can do to compete with the A&K Vector is make their better Vector. So hopefully that all makes sense, and I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a case study where we take a look at some of the back end of how all this works. Anyways, this is E-House from Gun Gamers, signing off.